All right, hello and welcome to another Expert Inside interview. My name is John Golden from Sales Pop, online sales magazine, and Pipeliner CRM, joining you as usual from a sunny San Diego. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Michael Erath, who is in probably an equally, if not more sunny Phoenix, Arizona. How are you doing, Michael?
Doing well, thanks. And you?
Yeah, doing great, doing great. And Michael is a seasoned entrepreneur, best-selling author, and founder of Next Level Growth, a Phoenix-based firm dedicated to helping entrepreneurial leaders build elite organizations. You scaled a family manufacturing business from 8 million to 45 million. And then during the 2009 housing crash, you had a devastating loss due to partners' fraud. But undeterred, you rebuilt and launched a new venture that landed on the Inc. 5000 list in 2015. And now through your work, you're empowering leaders to systematize their business and achieve a true return on life. And what we're going to talk about today is your book, Five Obsessions of Elite Organizations. So Michael, in your book, you outline five principles that set high performing companies apart. Tell me how you came to those, how you developed those five principles. What was the genesis of them?
Sure. The genesis for that came really from in my last business that I rebuilt. I had used bits and pieces of different tools from different systems and different things I'd read in the past, and I came across traction in EOS, and I implemented EOS,
Mhm.
which many people now are familiar with. But I took a very hybrid, customized approach to really make it custom tailored for me,
Mhm.
and a little bit less prescriptive than how it's defined in the book Traction. And after exiting that business, I spent a few years working as an EOS implementer. And one of the things that became a frustration over time was the prescriptive nature and the insistence on you have to do it this way. You can't really get outside the box. And
Right.
it didn't feel very entrepreneurial to me. And I really wanted to take a big step back and focus on underlying principles. And when I looked at different companies I had worked with and people I've known throughout my time in YPO and EO, I really wanted to focus on of the best performing organizations, what at their core level are the principles that they really obsess about, regardless of what tools they choose to use for them and their circumstances.
Mhm.
And that's where we arrived at these five principles that we call obsessions, from a standpoint of really thinking about the people who build things that are truly elite do in fact tend to obsess over a handful of things.
Yeah, and one of the things that you emphasize in your book is as a cornerstone of elite organizations is clarity.
Mhm.
And I find that, Michael, that a lot of organizations lack clarity, and whether they're startups or whether they're mature organizations, because things just happen over time. Maybe they go off and do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and before you know it, a lot of their things become a little nebulous in their organization. So talk to me a little bit about clarity.
Yeah, so I think it's there's a comment I make in the book, and I've come to believe this very sincerely, that when it comes to working relationships with people, the underlying source of our greatest frustrations is a result of unclear expectations.
Hmm.
And so one of the first things I like to ask, especially given your audience's demographic, when I'm taking on a new client, or any of our partners are taking on a new client, we always like to ask the sales leader if they can share with us a copy of their sales playbook. And you would be amazed at
Hmm.
organizations 20, 50, $100 million that they look at me like a deer in headlights.
Yep.
They they're caught off guard. They don't know what I'm talking about. And so if they're leading a team of 10, 20, 30 sales reps, inside, outside, doesn't matter,
Yep.
those people don't have clarity around how they're supposed to run the plays at various stages of the sales cycle. And therefore, they're having to make things up as they go, which creates chaos. It creates inconsistencies. Um, and so that's one of the things when we talk about expectations, is really giving people clarity around the plays they need to be running,
Mhm.
and also giving them clear targets as to what winning looks like for them in their role, and not using that to necessarily be punitive, but to be able to know how and where to coach and support them, and able to set them up to achieve those objectives.
Yeah, but think about it, it's a great point, Michael. Because I mean, think about it that if you don't have a sales playbook, if you don't have a rigorous sales process, if you're not very, very focused and very clear, um, then your prospects and customers are getting different messages and different experiences when they engage with your brand, right? And
Right.
sales is often one of the early places that somebody engages with the company's brand. So it could be very different whether they get you or me, Michael, if we don't have a playbook.
Exactly. And and when I talk with companies, for example, distributors with multiple branch locations or things like that, I think really the goal we're trying to get to is that anybody within the organization that a client or customer interacts with, whether it's sales operations, that the
Mhm.
experience from one location to the next is very on brand. It's a very consistent experience, and it's what you become known for.
Yeah.
I think that really is an important way to differentiate ourselves, is through an elevated and very curated experience.
Yeah, and you want to be careful what you become known for because I mean, I took over a company one time, Huthwaite, it was spin selling, and the first thing I did was go see existing customers, and I was shocked. They all loved what we did, loved the product, but said we were hard to do business with. So you don't want to be known as great product, but hard to do business with. So that was one of the first
Exactly.
things I had to fix.
Yeah.
So one of the first obsessions in your book is around great people, and Michael, this is something I hear from people all the time. Like, it's so
Mhm.
hard to find the right people. It's so hard to find A players. Then a lot of people aren't experiencing how to cultivate the people they have. Maybe they have potential A players on their team right now. They just don't know how to cultivate them. So, talk to me a little bit about great people.
Yeah, I think, it's I've had countless entrepreneurs when we first start talking about great people, they kind of roll their eyes at the, yeah, all I hear about is right people, right seats, but nobody wants to tell me how to do it, right? And
Hmm.
that was one of the things we wanted to get very clear on, and I write about this in the book. Um, I think all of these concepts are really worthless if you don't know how to operationalize them. And
Hmm.
so that's really our focus, and our focus in the book is to give people tools and guidance and insights on how to operationalize these things. And so, with regards to great people, I think it is kind of twofold. Number one, if I were to ask someone, for example, well, define for me what an A player in this role looks like.
Right.
You've got to be able to clearly define that. And we break it down in the way we frame an accountability chart. We call it a next level accountability chart, which is an evolution from org charts. Is every role should have a clearly stated mission that's one sentence that clearly defines high level what success looks like in the role, the consistent deliverable. There's a most critical outcome, which is a single outcomes based, not leading indicator, but an outcomes based measurable that's about results that prove success in that mission. And that's ultimately what people are measured by. And
Mhm.
then we want to give people what we call a handful of obsessions, 2 to 4, maybe 5. And these are buckets of responsibility they have to obsess about daily to be successful. Once we have that framework in place, and there are lots of examples in the book that people can use, there's resources you can download to get ideas and examples. But once you have that, you're able to start to establish clear expectations. So in the recruiting and onboarding process, we now have a standard that we can communicate very clearly to people. And if you're hiring me or interviewing me for a
Mhm.
sales role and you have that for me, I'm either going to be very excited because I know I can achieve these things. And if I'm held accountable to this and I have clarity on my data, I can succeed and I'm going to do very well here.
Mhm.
Or it's going to scare me away and say, hey, I don't want this level of accountability.
Right.
I can't hide in this organization. So I'm out of the interview, which is
Yeah.
ultimately what you want.
Yeah, which is a great outcome. Given the fact that I mean, I'm always honest with people. I'd say throughout my career, I have hired loads of people. Right, I can guarantee you, there's a small fraction of those have been fantastic hires, and a lot of them have been not so great because it is such a difficult thing to do. But one of the things that you mentioned there, and I think this is super important, as you mentioned, is about being very clear on what the role is, what the expectation is, the outcomes expected, because a lot of times people will just like cut and paste a job description off the internet that
Right.
seems to fit the person they want to hire them, have no onboarding plan for them, kind of, and then leave them to kind of flounder, and then turn around and go like 6 months later, go, oh, they're not working out, and you're thinking, well, of course they're not.
Right. Yeah. It's a great point. And one of the things that I talk about, and this is kind of a staple for me, but I always like to ask executives in an organization, if I were to survey the last 10 or 20 people that you hired, would they tell me they had an outstanding onboarding experience, or would they tell me they got waterboarded? And the reality is we tend to waterboard people
Hmm.
when we hire them. We throw them into a role. We don't
Yep.
give them enough to succeed. We hope they don't cause us any problems because we're, quote, too busy
Hmm.
to properly onboard them. And then we are frustrated that they don't work out.
Yep.
If you set clear expectations with me, if you're hiring me or interviewing me for a role, and we really have a dialogue in the interview process around those expectations, it creates a de facto agreement between us, which makes it easier for me to hold myself accountable, but also makes it easier for me to receive accountability and coaching from
Hmm.
you, because we already agreed to this before I took the job.
Yeah.
And if that's coupled with a great onboarding experience where you and I have lots of touch points, you're part of my development into the role, and I'm getting very clear feedback, I also feel like I have a great relationship with my boss, which I
Right.
probably have never had before in an organization. And it doesn't really cost you anything to do that, but you set new team members up for success that way. And I think it's a big missing opportunity in most organizations.
Yeah, no, I absolutely, I agree, because it's very easy to fall back on, well, I hired you because you're a self-starter, and you're highly personally motivated. You're going, yeah, that may all be true, but if I don't know what you want from me, how am I ever going to deliver?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So, in your book also, you draw from your personal experience, and especially the setback that you had in 2019,
Mhm.
2009 rather, with the housing crash, and obviously with the your partner, your business partner's fraud, and all of that. But how did that experience develop your obsession with disciplined execution? And how did disciplined execution help you to kind of get yourself back on track and rebuild?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think one of the things that I realized, and I talk about this in my first book, Rise, is which is really about that whole
Mhm.
story. But the partner that I brought in, he and I became very, very close friends. I was his son's godfather. We vacationed together with our families, and in hindsight, what we started to realize as the case against him came together was he was pulling me so close that it it softened me to be able to believe a lot of the BS that I was being fed.
Right.
And I had not built a system and a structure into the organization that was high accountability, high discipline to a handful of expectations. And as a result, it allowed me to waffle and not be as strong as I
Mhm.
needed to be as a leader. And I think oftentimes I see that with a lot of entrepreneurs that have started a business, they've had some success, and the business has scaled. They tend to, from a point of wanting to be too nice, they tolerate mediocrity, they tolerate things that they normally shouldn't, and they feel like they're doing a good thing by doing that. I heard a great Jordan Peterson quote at the Genius Network annual event last year. He said that enabling failure is not a noble cause.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It
No,
is.
I would 100% agree with that, and I think sometimes, and this is, you probably come across this, Michael, but I mean, it's like, I mean, Peter Drucker said that one of the biggest mistakes that executives make is not letting go of bad hires fast
Mm,
enough. Yeah,
yes.
and it's the same thing as you say, is like forgiving mediocrity, because and part of it is maybe because we haven't even established ourselves what excellence looks like, so that
Mm,
and we're also just hoping, sometimes we're just postponing it and hoping that it works out. But at the end of the day, if somebody's not right for the job and they're not doing well, you're actually you're not doing them any favors leaving them a job. You're actually denying them the opportunity to go and find somewhere where they can be successful, because let's face it, nobody really wants to be in a job where they're failing.
right, 100%. You're almost robbing them of some of their
You
life.
are. Yeah.
And there's your comment about Drucker reminded me. I heard somebody recently citing a documentary they were watching on professional poker players, and they said they asked they said, do you know the number one difference between professional and amateur poker players? I said, no. It's statistically, professional poker players play significantly fewer hands than amateurs, because
Hmm.
as soon as they have a bad hand, they're out.
Right, right, right.
And if you think about that with your people, how many times do we wait and if I just get that one right card, it's gonna work out.
Yeah.
The odds of getting that card are quite slim.
Yeah, it's the same thing as hanging on to that opportunity in your pipeline that all the indicators are that it's dead, it's gone, but you still hold on to it and you still
Right.
have it in your pipeline and it's still
Yeah.
inflating your forecast because you just don't want
Exactly.
to give it up.
Exactly.
Yeah, and tell me about this concept of return to life, because a lot of when you're talking about your books about obsessions and stuff, and it
Mhm.
sounds like it's very focused, and you get like really into get your business working. It sounds like it can become all encompassing, but you have this concept of return on life.
Yes. Yeah, and I think I appreciate you pointing that out, because I think there's an important balance to strike, and it's different for every person,
Hmm.
um, as to what it looks like to truly build an elite organization without losing everything that's truly important to you. Right? We get
Hmm.
to come this way once. Time is our most valuable resource, and our most fleeting, and so it's really about striking this balance between building a team to help support you so that you're not the one driving 60, 70, 80 hours a week nonstop. And where a lot of this came from was through my experience with various peer groups and through my own experience. Is I believe that most entrepreneurs achieve their success, their return on investment, at the expense of friendships,
Hmm.
family, relationships, their physical health, and even oftentimes their emotional health. And it's something that I feel like, for the amount of risk that entrepreneurs take on, it doesn't have to be that way. And so I think that it's important to strike a balance. And a lot of the concepts around the obsessions are, if you will get these right, and if you will focus on surrounding yourself with strong people who are aligned around your purpose and your vision and can help carry that load, then you don't become the choke point for it all, and ultimately end up choking on your business.
Yeah, and you've mentioned earlier about coaching and stuff, and I think sometimes people forget or think that they have to do everything on their own, whereas there's people out there, your people like you and others who can help them on that journey. And I've used coaches myself in the past, and it always amazes me. And I'm sorry if I'm repeating something I've said ad nauseum on here before, but but people will spend money on their hobbies, right? If you're a golfer or you're a pickleball, you're probably pay lessons and all of this kind of stuff, but don't invest anything on the thing that puts bread and butter on their table, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's very true. And I think, there's so many successful, the former Eric Schmidt, I think former CEO of Google, has talked about that. Numbers have said that, that if you think about it, every elite performer, athletic,
Hmm.
on stage, musicians, they all have coaches. It's typically, to your point, it's the professionals in the business world that tend to avoid having coaches. And I think there's something that, we all have ego, but I think
Hmm.
there's something about our ego that often makes us think less of ourselves if we accept that we need coaching and help. And I think that's a fallacy
Oh
to
yeah.
tell that to ourselves, but it's an easy trap to fall into, and then we become more isolated, we become more stuck.
Yeah, no, and it is, and sometimes people just go, "Oh, well, that's a lot of money," and you think, well, actually, if you get a good coach, the outcomes it pays for itself many times over. Certainly, the
Right.
coaching I've had in the past, I guarantee you, I couldn't put a number on the return on it. To be
Yeah.
honest, just as an aside, Michael, you've included an AI bot with the book,
Yes.
right? So just talk to me a little bit about that's a nice little innovation. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, I got the idea actually from Joe Polish, who's the founder of Genius Network that I'm a member of. And he had started to build out an AI clone of himself. And when I went back to thinking, when I first read the book Traction and started self-implementing my own kind of hybrid version of EOS, the only options were to buy the book and figure it out yourself, or go to the other extreme and hire a
Right.
coach to come help you do it. And so, in a lot of products, there's a good, better, best offering,
Mhm.
right? And so you had the good and you had the best, but there was no better. And
Hmm.
so the idea behind the clone is it's been trained, so even the transcript from this podcast will go into the training for the clone.
Excellent.
Um, the idea was for companies that are too small to really justify the expense of a full-time coach. Um, Number one, they can for $20 they can use the book as a guide. For another $30 a month, if they would like to subscribe to the clone, they can get access to all of the content and all of the knowledge and work with the clone to help them implement the tools of the system. And then if they wanted to hire one of our partners to help them as well, that's also a third option.
Right. Well, that's great, and it shows great application of AI. Well, listen, Michael, this has been fascinating, fantastic, and the book is Five Obsessions of Elite Organizations. All of Michael's information will be below this video. But before we go, please do remind people what you do.
Yeah, so we are a firm of seasoned entrepreneurs, all former owners or CEOs of companies that have generated at least 10 million in revenue, have had at least 50 employees. So that's the level of scale and significantly beyond that we've reached. And we work with entrepreneurs and their executive teams to help them build a really custom tailored business operating system that's about them and outcomes and puts primacy on the user, not on the system.
Right.
We're a very systems agnostic, outcomes based approach based on these five principles rather than based on a one size fits all system.
Right, perfect. Well, I would encourage you to go check it out. As I said, all the information will be below this video. So, listen, thanks again, Michael. Thank you for watching and listening. I will see you all again very soon. Thank you.